John lived in a small, quiet neighborhood where the houses stood close to each other, with green lawns and colorful flowers. It was the kind of place where everyone seemed to know each other, and many families had lived there for years. John had moved into his house 5 years ago. It was his dream home, a small but cozy place where he felt safe and happy. John was a kind man. He worked at the local library and loved reading books and gardening in his free time. He kept his house clean and took care of his yard. He liked peace and quiet, and he enjoyed greeting neighbors with a smile when he met them outside. But not everyone in the neighborhood liked John. The Homeowners Association, or HOA, was a group of people who made sure everyone followed certain rules. They wanted the neighborhood to look perfect. One of the leaders of the HOA was a woman named Mary. Mary was known for being strict and serious. She often walked around the neighborhood, checking if people were following the rules about their lawns, fences, and even the colors of their houses. Mary had a sharp voice and a serious face. She believed rules were very important and should be followed exactly. She thought this was the best way to keep the neighborhood beautiful and safe. But many people felt she was too strict and sometimes unfair. John had never had problems with his neighbors until Mary started paying special attention to his house. It began with small things. One afternoon, Mary knocked on John's door. She pointed to his front lawn and said, "John, your grass is a little too long. Please cut it by tomorrow. The HOA rules say grass must be less than 3 inches. John smiled politely. "I will take care of it, Mary. Thank you for letting me know." But the next week, Mary returned with a frown. This time, she complained about some flowers John had planted in his garden. "These flowers are not allowed," she said. "They are not on the approved list." John was surprised. He had always planted flowers he liked, and no one had told him this before. He tried to explain that he loved gardening and that his flowers made his yard beautiful, but Mary didn't listen. She said the rules were the rules. Neighbors started to notice Mary's frequent visits to John's house. Some whispered to each other, wondering why Mary was so focused on John. "Maybe he doesn't follow the rules like others," some said. But John always followed the rules as best as he could. He paid his HOA fees on time and tried to keep his home in good shape. He did not understand why Mary seemed to dislike him. The tension grew over the months. Mary sent John several letters, each one more demanding than the last. She told him to remove a small fence he had put up around his garden. She told him to repaint his front door a different color. John felt frustrated. He loved his house and his garden. He had worked hard to make his home look nice. Mary's strictness felt like a punishment, but he tried to stay calm. He wrote polite letters back, asking for explanations and hoping to find a way to agree. One day, John overheard some neighbors talking near the mailbox. "Mary has always been tough with John," said one woman. "I don't know why she picks on him. It feels like she just doesn't like him." John's heart sank. He did not want to be the cause of problems in the neighborhood. He only wanted to live in peace. Mary's strictness did not stop at letters. One morning, John found a note stuck to his front door. It said, "Final warning, if you do not follow the HOA rules by the end of this week, legal action will be taken." John's hands shook as he read the note. Legal action? He had never imagined things would become so serious. He called the HOA office, hoping to speak with Mary. But Mary was busy and refused to meet him. John felt alone. John's friends tried to support him. Sarah, who lived down the street, told him, "You don't deserve this, John. Mary is being unfair. Maybe we can talk to the HOA board together." But the board meetings were difficult. Mary spoke loudly, pointing at John and saying he was causing trouble. Some neighbors nodded quietly, not wanting to get involved. John began to feel tired and worried. His house, once a place of happiness, now felt like a source of stress. One evening, as John watered his plants, he thought about moving away. Maybe the neighborhood was not the right place for him anymore. But then he remembered the stories he had heard at the library about people who stood up for themselves when things were unfair. He thought about his father, who had always taught him to be strong and kind, even when things were hard. John decided he would not give up his home without a fight. He would find a way to prove that he was a good neighbor, and that Mary's harsh treatment was wrong. As the sun set behind the trees, John looked around his yard. The flowers still bloomed, and the grass still grew. His house might be small, but it was full of memories and dreams. John took a deep breath. He knew the fight ahead would be difficult. But he was ready. After deciding not to give up, John felt a little stronger inside. But the days that followed were not easy. Mary's visits became more frequent and her words sharper. It seemed like every time John looked outside, there she was standing by the sidewalk with her clipboard, watching him closely. One bright Saturday morning, John was fixing a small crack on his front steps when he saw Mary approaching. She did not smile or say hello like a neighbor might. Instead, she held up a paper and said, "John, you have too many tools outside your house. The HOA rules say all equipment must be stored out of sight. Please clean up immediately." John wiped the sweat from his forehead and nodded. "I'll put the tools away right now," he said politely. Mary watched as John carried the tools inside. But she wasn't satisfied. After John finished, she wrote another note and slipped it under his door. John found it later that day. The note read, "Your garden fence still does not meet HOA standards. You must remove it by the end of the week, or we will begin legal procedures." John felt his chest tighten. He loved the small fence. It protected his plants from stray animals. But Mary's words left him no choice. He spent the next 2 days carefully taking down the fence. His hands were sore, but he did it quietly. He didn't want more trouble. Still, the letters kept coming. One evening, as John sat reading in his living room, he heard a knock at the door. It was Mary, again. "I am here to inspect your yard," she said firmly. "You have made too many changes without approval." John invited her in politely, hoping to explain himself. He showed her the plants, the flowers, and the small decorations he had carefully placed. He talked about how he loved gardening and cared for his home. Mary listened but said, "Rules are rules. Your garden doesn't fit the community standards. You need to remove the decorations." John tried to stay calm. "Mary, I have tried to follow the rules, but I don't understand why you are so strict with me. Others have decorations, too." Mary looked away for a moment, then said, "I am only doing my job." John felt a wave of sadness wash over him. It wasn't just about the rules anymore. He felt like Mary didn't want him to belong here. After Mary left, John sat on his porch and looked at his yard. It felt empty and cold. The flowers seemed less bright, and the house looked less like home. The next day, John talked to his friend Sarah about what was happening. "Sarah," he said, "I don't know what to do. Mary is making life so hard for me. It feels like she is trying to push me out." Sarah frowned. "That's not right, John. No one should feel like that in their own home." John nodded. "I'm scared this will never end." Sarah put a hand on his shoulder. "Maybe we should talk to other neighbors. See if they feel the same way." John agreed. Over the next few days, they quietly asked neighbors if they had any problems with Mary or the HOA. Some said yes, but many were too afraid to speak openly. Mary was known to be tough, and no one wanted to get involved. One afternoon, John received a phone call from the HOA office. The voice on the other end was cold and serious. "This is a final warning," the voice said. "If you do not fix the issues in your yard within 5 days, the HOA will take legal action." John felt a knot in his stomach. Legal action? He did not want to fight in court. But what choice did he have? He spent that night planning how to make the yard better, hoping it would be enough. But then, things took a more frightening turn. One morning, John found strange marks on his front door, scratches, deep and angry. He didn't know who did it. The neighbors said they didn't see anything. John called the police to report the damage. The officer who came was kind but said, "Without witnesses, it's hard to find the person responsible." John nodded quietly. He felt more alone than ever. The same night, John heard strange noises outside his house. Someone was walking slowly around the yard. He peeked through the window but saw nothing. The next day, he found that some of his plants had been damaged. The flowers were crushed, and the garden looked like it had been stepped on. John's heart broke. Someone was trying to hurt what he loved. He told Sarah, who was shocked. "John, this is serious. You need to be careful." John began to worry about his safety. What if something worse happened? But he did not want to leave his home. This house was his life. The HOA meetings became even more tense. Mary continued to blame John for breaking rules. She told the other members that John was difficult and refused to cooperate. John tried to speak up, but Mary talked over him. Some neighbors stared silently, unsure what to think. One night, John sat alone in his dark living room, thinking about everything that had happened. He remembered his childhood, the stories his father told him about standing up for what is right. He thought about all the times he had helped others at the library and in the neighborhood. John realized he could not give up now. He had to keep fighting, not just for himself, but for anyone who had ever felt unfairly treated. He made a decision to gather proof. He started writing down every letter, every visit from Mary, and every strange thing that happened to his property. He took photos of the damage and kept notes of conversations. John also asked Sarah and a few trusted neighbors if they would support him. They agreed to help if things went to court. Despite the fear and frustration, John felt a small spark of hope. He knew the fight ahead would be long and hard, but he was no longer alone. As the sun rose on a new day, John looked at his house with determination. "This is my home," he whispered. "I will protect it." John had been fighting for weeks, gathering evidence, talking to neighbors, and trying to stay strong. But one evening, everything changed in a way he never expected. It was late at night. John was asleep when suddenly, the sharp sound of sirens woke him. He jumped out of bed, heart pounding. Looking out the window, he saw bright orange flames and thick smoke rising from his house. His stomach dropped. The fire was spreading fast. John rushed outside in his slippers and pajamas, but the fire was already too large. Neighbors gathered around, some crying, some shocked. The fire trucks arrived quickly, and firefighters ran toward the burning house. But the flames were too strong. John stood frozen, watching his home burn. The place where he had laughed, dreamed, and worked so hard to build was now a pile of ashes. Tears rolled down his cheeks. He could not believe what was happening. After the fire was finally put out, John was left with nothing. His house was completely destroyed. All his belongings, clothes, books, pictures, and memories were gone. The next morning, the neighborhood was quiet. People whispered as they passed by the empty, blackened lot where John's house once stood. John stayed with Sarah for a few days. She helped him find clothes and food, and offered a shoulder to cry on. But John felt lost and broken. He kept asking himself, who would do this? How could this happen? The police started an investigation. They asked John many questions. John told them about the problems with Mary and the HOA. He shared the letters and notes he had collected. The police listened carefully but told John it was too early to say what caused the fire. Meanwhile, Mary and the HOA board held a meeting. Rumors spread quickly that Mary was calm and quiet during the meeting. She said little about the fire but talked about the neighborhood's future. Some neighbors felt confused. They wanted to believe the fire was an accident. Others were suspicious. John wanted answers. He knew something was wrong. The fire was not just a terrible accident, it felt like something more. John's friends and some neighbors began to support him more openly. Sarah helped organize a small group to talk to the police and the media. They wanted to make sure the fire was properly investigated. John gave interviews, telling his story simply and honestly. He spoke about the unfair treatment he had faced and his hope for justice. But Mary stayed silent. She never spoke to John or the media. It was as if she wanted to disappear from the neighborhood. Days turned into weeks. The police continued their work but found no clear proof of who caused the fire. John's heart ached every day. He missed his home, his garden, and the life he had built. But he refused to give up. One evening, John sat with Sarah and the group of neighbors in her living room. They talked quietly about what to do next. "We have to stay strong," Sarah said. "If we don't fight now, things will get worse." John nodded. "I want to rebuild," he said softly. "Not just my house, but my life." The group agreed to help John find a lawyer who could take the case. They believed the truth would come out, no matter how hard it was. John also started writing again, this time not just about the HOA but about his dreams and hopes. He wrote letters to the city officials, asking for help and protection. At night, John dreamed of the day he would stand in front of a judge and tell his story. He wanted to show the world that no one should lose their home without justice. But the pain of the fire still burned deep inside him. One afternoon, John visited the empty lot where his house had stood. The ground was covered with black ashes and broken pieces of wood. He knelt down and touched the earth, feeling the cold ashes in his hand. "This was my home," he whispered. "I will not let this be the end." John knew the road ahead would be difficult, but he also knew he was not alone anymore. Neighbors who once watched quietly now spoke out. They believed in John's fight for truth and fairness. As the sun set behind the trees, John looked up at the sky, feeling a quiet strength inside. He had lost his home, but he had not lost hope. After the fire, John knew he could not simply wait for answers. The police investigation was slow, and no one had given him any clear information. The burning of his home was not just a personal loss, it felt like a message. John was determined to find the truth himself. He began to gather every piece of evidence he could find. Every letter, every note, every photo, he kept them all in a special folder. He wanted to be ready for whatever came next. John also started talking more with his neighbors. Some had always been kind to him, but now they seemed to understand his pain even better. Sarah and a few others helped him collect stories and memories about Mary's behavior over the past months. One neighbor, Mr. Lee, who lived 2 houses down, said quietly, "I saw Mary near your house the night before the fire. She was walking slowly, carrying something, but I didn't think much of it at the time." John's heart raced as he listened. This was important. Another neighbor, Mrs. Diaz, added, "I heard strange noises late that night too. It sounded like footsteps, but I was afraid to look outside." John thanked them for their courage. He knew many people were scared to speak openly about Mary because she was powerful in the neighborhood. John also asked a young man named Tom, who worked at a nearby store, to check security cameras around the neighborhood. Tom found a few recordings that showed a figure walking near John's house late at night on the day the fire started. The figure's face was not clear, but the clothes looked like what Mary often wore. John felt a mix of hope and fear. This was the kind of evidence he needed, but it was also proof that someone close to the HOA might be responsible. He took the videos and photos to a lawyer named Miss Patel, who had agreed to help him. Miss Patel was kind but serious. She looked carefully at all the documents and said, "John, This is strong evidence. We can take this to court, but we must prepare well. Mary and the HOA will fight back hard. John nodded. He was ready. He wanted the truth to come out, no matter what. Miss Patel also helped John file a formal complaint with the city. She said, "This case is about more than your house. It's about fairness and safety for everyone in this community." While the legal process began, John's life became busy with meetings and phone calls. Sometimes he felt tired and overwhelmed. But every time he thought about giving up, he remembered the flames destroying his home and the hope he still had for justice. John's friends continued to support him. Sarah organized neighborhood gatherings where people talked about their concerns and shared ideas for making the community safer and kinder. One evening, during a small meeting at Sarah's house, John stood up and spoke softly but firmly. "We cannot let fear and anger win," he said. "We need to stand together and make sure what happened to me never happens again." The room was silent for a moment. Then, one by one, neighbors nodded in agreement. They began to share their own stories of feeling watched or judged by the HOA. John realized that he was not alone in this struggle. Many people wanted change. But Mary did not stay quiet. After the fire, she became more cautious but also more secretive. Some neighbors said she had stopped visiting houses as often. Others heard she was meeting with lawyers and planning her defense. John's case was growing larger than just one man's loss. It was becoming a story about power, fairness, and community. One day, John received a letter from the HOA. It was an invitation to a meeting to discuss the fire and the future of the neighborhood. John felt nervous but decided to go. He wanted to face Mary and the board, to speak his truth directly. The day of the meeting arrived. The community center was filled with people, some curious, some worried. John's heart beat fast as he entered the room. Mary was there too, sitting at the front with the other board members. She looked calm but distant. When it was John's turn to speak, he took a deep breath and stood up. "I lost my home in a fire," he began. "I believe that fire was not an accident. I have evidence and witnesses that show someone from the HOA might be responsible." There was a murmur in the room. Some people looked shocked, others uncomfortable. John continued, "This is not just about me. It's about trust, safety, and fairness for all of us. We need to work together to make sure everyone feels safe in this neighborhood." Mary stood up and responded coldly, "These are serious accusations, John. The HOA denies any involvement. We will defend ourselves against any false claims." The room felt tense. John looked at the faces around him, some supportive, some unsure. Despite the fear, John felt proud. He was standing up for what was right. The meeting ended without a clear answer, but John knew this was just the beginning. As he walked home that night, he felt a strange mix of hope and uncertainty. The road ahead was still long, but now he had the truth on his side. John looked up at the stars, whispering to himself, "I will find justice. No matter what." The day John had been waiting for had finally arrived. After months of gathering evidence, talking to neighbors, and preparing with his lawyer, John was ready to face Mary and the HOA in court. The courthouse was a large building with tall pillars and heavy wooden doors. John felt nervous as he stepped inside. He wore his best clothes, a simple shirt and trousers, and held tightly onto the folder filled with all the evidence he had collected. His heart beat faster when he saw Mary sitting at the other side of the courtroom. She looked calm and confident, dressed in a neat suit. The HOA board members sat with her, watching quietly. John's lawyer, Miss Patel, gave him a reassuring nod. "We are ready," she whispered. The judge entered the courtroom and everyone stood. After the judge took their seat, the trial began. First, the lawyer for the HOA spoke. She tried to make John's case seem weak, saying there was no proof Mary was responsible for the fire. She said the HOA only wanted to keep the neighborhood safe and that John had broken rules which caused problems. John felt his stomach tighten, but he stayed focused. When it was his turn, Miss Patel stood and presented the evidence clearly. She showed the letters Mary had sent to John, demanding changes and threatening legal action. She played the security video that showed someone near John's house the night of the fire, someone who looked like Mary. The courtroom was silent as the video played. Next, neighbors who had witnessed Mary near John's house spoke bravely. Mr. Lee told the court about seeing Mary the night before the fire. Mrs. Diaz shared the sounds she heard late that night. John listened quietly, feeling grateful for their support. Mary's lawyer tried to question the witnesses, but their stories stayed the same. It was clear they were telling the truth. Mary finally stood to speak. She denied everything, saying she was not near John's house that night and that the fire was an accident. Her voice was steady, but John noticed her hands trembling slightly. The judge listened carefully to both sides, asking questions to understand more. John felt nervous but strong. This was his chance to tell his story, the pain he felt, the unfair treatment, and the loss of his home. When John spoke, his voice was calm but full of feeling. This house was more than just a building, he said. It was my safe place. I worked hard to build a life here. I followed the rules as best as I could, but I was treated unfairly. I believe someone wanted to hurt me, and my home paid the price. Some people in the courtroom looked moved. Others whispered quietly. The judge thanked everyone for their honesty and said the decision would take some time. John and Mary both waited quietly, the weight of the moment hanging in the air. Outside the courthouse, reporters waited, hoping to hear what happened. John spoke briefly to the press, thanking his neighbors and friends for their support. He said he hoped the truth would come out soon. Mary did not speak to anyone. She left quietly with the HOA members. John walked home with Sarah, feeling both tired and hopeful. "This is only the start," Sarah said. "But you did great." John nodded. "No matter what happens, I know I stood up for what is right." Over the next few days, John found it hard to focus on anything else. He thought about the fire, the court, and what might come next. He also thought about his neighbors, the ones who had stayed silent and the ones who had found courage. John knew that the fight was bigger than him. It was about fairness, safety, and community trust. One afternoon, while sitting in a small cafe, John received a phone call from Miss Patel. Her voice was calm but serious. "John, the judge has reviewed the case. We will have a hearing soon to discuss the next steps. The court is taking this very seriously." John felt a mix of relief and anxiety. The truth was coming closer. That evening, John sat on his porch, looking at the empty lot where his house had been. He thought about rebuilding not just the house, but the neighborhood too. He knew it would take time, patience, and courage. But John was ready. He whispered softly, "This is my home. And I will keep fighting for it." The days after the courtroom session were full of waiting. John felt like time had slowed down. Every morning he checked his phone, hoping for news from his lawyer, Miss Patel. She had promised him that the court was taking the case seriously, but waiting was difficult. John kept busy by meeting with neighbors and friends who still supported him. Sarah was by his side every day, helping him stay strong. She often reminded him, "You're doing the right thing, John. Don't lose hope." One afternoon, a letter arrived from the city officials. It was a notice about a meeting to discuss neighborhood safety and rules. John decided to attend. He thought it was important for the community to come together and talk honestly. At the meeting, many people spoke about their fears and frustrations. Some talked about Mary and the HOA's strict rules. Others shared their hope for a kinder, more understanding neighborhood. John stood up and spoke clearly. "We all want a safe and happy place to live," he said. But that means treating everyone with respect and fairness. We cannot allow fear or unfair rules to divide us. Some people nodded. Others looked thoughtful. After the meeting, John felt a new kind of strength. The community was beginning to listen. Back at home, John worked with Miss Patel to prepare for the next court hearing. They reviewed all the evidence again. John shared everything he had learned from neighbors and the security footage. Miss Patel said, "John, your courage is inspiring. We will use all of this to show the court the truth." But not everyone was happy with the attention the case was getting. John noticed a few neighbors whispering and avoiding him. He understood they were scared or unsure what to believe. One evening, as John walked home from Sarah's house, he noticed something strange. A car was parked near his empty lot, with the engine running. John slowed down and looked carefully. The driver was watching the house silently. John's heart beat faster. He felt the old fear return. But this time, he did not run. Instead, he took out his phone and quietly recorded the car and the driver. The next day, John showed the video to Miss Patel and the police. They promised to keep an eye on the area. John realized that even though he was being watched, he was not alone anymore. People were standing with him, ready to help. Days later, the court hearing began again. This time, John and Miss Patel presented even stronger evidence. They shared the video of the car and the witness statements from neighbors. Mary and the HOA board tried to defend themselves, but their story was not as strong. The judge listened carefully. After several hours of questions and answers, the judge asked for a break. John waited nervously, hoping the judge would see the truth. When the court session resumed, the judge announced a decision that surprised many. Based on the evidence and witness testimony, the judge said, there is enough reason to believe the fire was not accidental. The court orders a full investigation into the HOA's role in this case. The room filled with gasps and whispers. John felt a wave of relief wash over him. The truth was finally getting the attention it deserved. After the hearing, neighbors came to John, shaking his hand and offering words of support. Sarah smiled and said, "You did it, John. You made them listen." John smiled back, feeling a hope he had not felt in a long time. The investigation was slow, but now the HOA board was under real pressure. John's story became a symbol for many people who felt unfairly treated in their communities. Even Mary stayed quiet. The power she once had was fading. John continued to work with his lawyer and friends, hoping to rebuild not only his home but also the trust in his neighborhood. One morning, as John stood on his empty lot watching the sun rise, he felt a peaceful calm inside. The journey had been hard, but he had found strength in truth, courage, and friendship. John whispered softly, "This is just the beginning. A better future is coming." The investigation continued for several months. John stayed patient, even when the waiting felt difficult. He knew that real change took time, but he was determined to see justice done. The city officials and police worked carefully. They interviewed many people, reviewed all the evidence, and looked closely at the HOA's actions. Slowly, the truth began to come out. Mary and some members of the HOA board faced serious questions. It was clear that they had not been honest with the community or the court. John's heart swelled with a mixture of sadness and relief. The fire that had destroyed his home was not a random accident. Someone had acted unfairly and without care. But even as the investigation continued, something else was changing. Neighbors who had once been quiet now spoke openly about their hopes for a better community. They wanted to rebuild not just houses, but trust. Sarah and a group of neighbors started planning events to bring people together. They held clean-up days, small picnics, and meetings to talk about kindness and fairness. John joined them whenever he could. He wanted to help heal the neighborhood. One sunny afternoon, John stood in the park with Sarah and some neighbors. Children played nearby, laughing and running freely. John looked around, feeling a deep sense of peace. "This is what we've been working for," he said quietly. "A place where everyone feels safe and welcome." Sarah smiled. "You made that possible, John. Your courage gave us hope." John shook his head gently. "It was all of us. Together." With the investigation reaching its final stages, the city held a public meeting. Many residents came to hear the results. The mayor spoke honestly about the problems in the neighborhood and promised new rules to protect everyone's rights. John stood and shared his story once more, not with anger, but with hope. "I lost my home, but I gained something more important: your friendship and trust," he said. "I believe we can build a better future, where everyone is treated with respect." The room filled with applause. A few weeks later, John received a letter from the court. It said that Mary and some HOA members would face consequences for their actions. The fire was declared an act of negligence, and John was awarded support to rebuild his home. John felt a lightness in his heart. Finally, the path to healing had begun. With the help of friends and the community, John started rebuilding. The house was not just bricks and wood, it was a symbol of hope and strength. Neighbors offered to help with the work. Sarah brought meals, children painted walls, and friends shared tools. John's smile grew wider every day. One evening, as the sun set and painted the sky in warm colors, John sat on his porch, looking at his new home. It was not just a building, it was a promise that no one should ever feel alone or powerless. John thought about the long journey he had traveled. The pain, the fear, the courage, and the support. He knew the road had been hard, but it had made him stronger. John whispered softly, "This is a new beginning for me and for all of us." And with that hope shining in his eyes, John looked forward to the future. A future filled with kindness, fairness, and new friendships.